Okay, if we can start with, if you can give us some idea why you think data center growth is becoming one of, if not the UK sort of biggest infrastructure opportunities. What's going on at the moment?
So the global investment, so data centers is just a massive industry at the moment, and the global investment is really scaling rapidly. The world's largest technology companies are spending 320 billion on data center infrastructure in 2026 alone. The UK government has designated data centers as a critical infrastructure industry. So it's actually becoming, or it is now, as important as sort of the emergency services, which seems crazy, really, sort of healthcare, energy, water supplies. But I think the idea is that data centers are underpinning this AI growth that we're having, obviously supplying cloud services and the wider digital economy. And it's, as I said, it really, the demand is accelerated by AI. And really that's now becoming embedded across all sectors. So it's not just obviously within the AI sector, but healthcare, finance, they're all leaning towards looking at how they need data. And for the UK, this is really a chance to not only host infrastructure, but to capture sort of long-term economic value. Really, and we'll probably touch on this a bit later, thinking about how we can protect our security with data sovereignty. And for us, what we're finding the key is really around execution. So how do we align power, planning, land and skills within the sector?
Okay, and I mean, I guess it's a fairly global phenomenon, the sort of AI expansion and then the data centers to underpin that. Are there any particular things you think that make the UK an attractive destination for data center investment right now? So I guess we're talking about, obviously, to a certain extent, addressing the internal market, but are there opportunities to sort of, host overseas, companies and data and all
Yeah.
that? Just give us some idea of where the UK scores.
Well, I think the UK is always sort of trying to drive innovation, and currently Britain is the sort of the third largest AI market in the world. In January 2025, the UK launched sort of an AI opportunities action plan, which was looking at how we can ramp up AI adaptation across UK, really to sort of boost economy, drive future jobs, and provide, I suppose, changes and improve people's lives every day, really. And certainly, I've got a son, and I've got a couple of sons, and they're always on their iPhones. They're looking at their Netflix, and I think people don't necessarily understand the interactions that they have with data centers every day. UK obviously has really strong connectivity, and it has quite a dense networking infrastructure, obviously because we're a slightly smaller island than some of the continents there. So it actually works to our advantage, because certainly hyperscalers are looking for resilience across these regions. And the demand isn't just being driven by sort of gaming, streaming. It really is around this AI competition, let's say, and it's definitely being fueled by the hyperscalers, who are obviously competing for market lead. And if we connect onto that, then there is no reason why we can't have a sustained long-term need for capacity, which could be driven through the UK. And I think the reason why the UK is particularly interesting is because it does offer sort of stable regulatory and local and legal environments. So we can drive long-term investments because they can get that certainty around planning, permitting, and sort of marketing frameworks. Other regions are moving quickly. My role covers the whole of Europe as well, and there are other countries that are obviously trying to ramp up at speed as well. So it's really important that if the UK doesn't want to fall behind, they do need to look at how we can really secure land, power, permitting to make sure that we can drive growth.
Okay, and I guess historically London has been the centre of the UK data centre industry, but
Yes.
I'm wondering, is that still the case moving forward? So in terms of this next generation of data centres to be built out in the UK, are we still talking London and the wider southeast, or are there other areas that have certain advantages, or at least should be considered along with the southeast?
Yeah, so you're absolutely right. Historically, it's sort of been London and the southeast. We obviously now have the AI growth zones, and these have been cited Scotland, northeast Wales, and Oxfordshire. And these particular locations have been selected because of their access to power, and a lot of them have sort of already existing site grid connections or energy infrastructure. And the idea is that a lot of these will be sustainable as well. Obviously, in Scotland, we've got the offshore wind. And if we locate in these places, then it is going to reduce the pressure on these more congested areas in the southeast. And it will also bring the opportunity of regeneration and growth within these regions. I'm not sure as an industry, we are seeing the uptake of these AI growth zones yet. I think we're waiting for the hyperscalers to jump into these regions, but it's more of a whisper around sort of who's going to be moving in rather than a large noise. I know that sort of, and I was at Platform a couple of weeks ago, and there was people sort of from Scotland and Manchester talking about how we could drive growth. And I think a lot of the local councils are trying to push for this, but it's trying to hook those developers in and showing them that there is opportunity for growth, skills, and power. So I think if we can get away, I think then it will open up a whole new area of which that we can start growing and building data centers to cope with the demand.
And in terms of those biggest barriers, I suspect traditionally power is always the issue, but are there any other things that are sort of significant obstacles when it comes to delivering data centers at scale in the UK over the coming years?
Yeah, I mean, the obvious one is power, and everybody, that's all we talk about in the industry. Have we got power? It's really sort of upgrading the grid connections as well, which is quite key. And actually, as a business, AECOM are working on the Great Grid Upgrade, which will obviously support some of the upgrades in infrastructure required. The timeline and visibility of these upgrades is really key. Other things are, I think, other challenges that we have within the UK that certainly not necessarily other countries have is the cost of electricity. We are 4 times more expensive than the US and regions like the Nordics and Finland, where we do see a lot of developments happening. So there is potentially something that could be done about the cost of electricity. I think we obviously have land scarcity, which does limit growth. So, these AI growth zones could really support on that. Community engagement is quite prevalent, and I think there's still a lot of people that do not understand what a data center is and what it does. And it's a sort of a case of not in my back garden, but I think we really need to educate our communities and demonstrate why data centers are required and what advantages that they can have to support local communities. And I think there is a reliance on our developers to support the communities back. What are they giving back? And I know in a lot of regions this is very important. Water usage might be another one that people have heard mentioned. I think technologies are developing so quickly, and manufacturers are looking at more and more efficient ways of cooling our data centers. So water isn't necessarily so much of an issue as it might have been in the past. But again, there's an education there and making sure that we are using those technologies and the liquid cooling as required. And then the final one for me that and we may touch on this a little bit later, is the skills shortage. I'm very passionate about how we educate the next generation and how we don't lose the skills that are retiring. And electrical engineers, digital infrastructure, operation roles are all really, really key parts of designing and running a data center. And we don't have the talent, and we need to look at how we can address this so that we can overcome some of these challenges that we have in the data center industry.
Okay, yeah, I'll ask a bit more about skills in a moment, but just before that, it'd be good to understand, and I expect there isn't a simple answer, but in terms of how the UK can deliver data centers, because obviously speed to market is crucial. So is there a particular combination of things that needs to happen in terms of how can deliver the speed, demand, and I guess the speed and the capacity that's demanded at the moment?
Yeah, I think time scales matter more than ever. Whenever I speak to a client, there's always two things that they say. One is speed of delivery, and the other one is technical quality. And so the clients are demanding that we are delivering faster and faster. And so how do we actually do this? I think certainly for us as an engineering firm, we look at how we can come up with sort of more efficient ways of working. Accelerating delivery is going to require faster grid access, coordinating planning, and early alignment of land, power, and investment. There is a case for partnershiping models, bringing utility companies together and developers. And if we can do this and everybody gets on the same page, we can certainly support driving that speed. Acceleration of delivery of designs. We are getting faster and faster at delivering. We are looking at how AI can support on that side of things and how it can unlock the speed and efficiency. We talk a lot about sort of AI factories, but we don't talk a lot about how we're going to use AI to support delivery and maintenance and operation. And I think there's definitely, moving forward, we need to be looking at that because it will drive efficiencies and speed. And so really it's about having a tool or a system. It's a different delivery model. We can't keep working in the same way. There has to be a new way of thinking of how we can deliver this working with AI. And it's really about sort of creating buildings for purpose. But yeah, I think it's going to be very interesting to see how AI is going to support us in the future.
I'm just wondering that future you described, can the industry supply chain be sort of trusted, inverted commas, to do what's necessary itself, or does it need a nudge from the government, whether it's these AI growth zones and trying to incentivize people to come together, or do you think the industry sort of understands what it needs to do and will therefore do it?
Do you mean on sorry, I just want to clarify, do you mean on how we actually deliver?
Yeah, in terms of that delivery model, just encouraging, as you say, a sligely different approach.
So I think it's very interesting. I think AI is still slightly unknown what it can do for us. I think people need to embrace it because it's not going anywhere. AI is not going anywhere. It's with us. And it's understanding how we can work best with AI to support the way we work and to come up with smarter ways of thinking, maybe ways that we've never thought of doing before. And it will be an education. And if the government has that understanding, then yeah, absolutely, they can drive that. But I think it's up to all of us to talk and be open about it and to find ways of being more efficient for each other. And, a lot of the times we're trying to sort of protect our own work, but really for us to drive forward, we do need to be talking to each other, learning from each other, and we're always learning lessons learned has been my favorite. I've changed it to knowledge share because I can't bear lessons learned. It's suggesting we've done something wrong. But yeah, knowledge share is so key. And it you know, a project, you learn lessons, but as an industry, we're learning all the time. So we have to share that knowledge. But yeah, I think it's going to be very interesting. And yeah, watch this space.
And when coming on to the skills, I think it's fair to say that the current profile of the data center industry is dare I say, folks my age and older. So a lot of people are going to move out of the industry shortly at a time when there's this, sudden extra demand, if you like. So what does the data center boom mean? I mean, there's going to be lots of jobs in training, but potentially not enough people there. And I guess, the digital economy we're in, competing with other industry sectors for the same kind of skills. So how big a problem is finding the right talent, do you think, in the coming years?
So I am so passionate about encouraging young people into my industry and into the sector and the built environment, and because I just think it's such an exciting place to be, sort of watching the world change around you. So I'm always trying to encourage, go and present, tell people, educate people. And I have so much respect for those people that are at the later stage of their careers, that are looking to enjoy a life after working very hard. But I am so aware that some of the skills that are going to be retiring are skills that we need now. I think there is going to be, with AI, there will be a change. My children will not know what the jobs are. There are jobs that we don't know exist yet. And it is going to change because AI will support, and it will take away some of those mundane jobs that I suppose a lot of us think, oh, why am I doing this again? And so we, as a culture, we need to look at how we can upskill, how we can really understand efficient ways of working, and we need to get smarter with that. And so I think it will, if we don't address the fact that the skills need to change, the way we work needs to change, then there will be a massive issue. I think if we can look ahead and we can say, yes, there are going to be changes, we will need different skills. We can use AI to support us on this, but we can never take away that human interaction. These conversations that we have, we need to be spending time with clients. We need to be looking at innovation. We need to understand how we can better support the development, not just in data centers, but in economic growth. I mean, we've got some geopolitical, concerns going on at the moment, and it does become worrying. So I think looking at our jobs, looking at how we can support the industry is, for me, is a really sort of massive part of, what I do, and trying to encourage people into the industry. So I think, as a whole, the industry, government, education providers do need to look at how we can make sure that we backfill, we retrain, and just make sure that there is that support.
And I'm wondering, I mean, I'm sort of well out of the education system, but I'm not aware. Do you think there need to be different ways of describing sort of degrees and training, that using words like digital and even, data centers, rather than, you can become a mechanical engineer or an electrical engineer, but that's not necessarily obviously related to that. Whereas if there are actually, degrees or courses in digital infrastructure, whatever, or, data center engineering, do you think something as simple as that might be helpful in sort of highlighting the career that exists in the sort of digital infrastructure economy?
I think, Philip, that's a really interesting question. I think, if I think back to when I was at that stage where and it was a little while ago, when I was going into my degree, I did not know what I wanted to do. I think a lot of young people don't necessarily understand what it is they need to do. I just knew that I loved the way things worked, and so I became a mechanical engineer. And I look at my children, I look at my son who's doing his GCSEs and he's about to do his A levels, and he hasn't got a clue. I think a lot of people don't know what they want to do. I think that and even when you're applying for for degrees. I'm not sure there is really that full awareness. I think it's probably on us in the industry to go out and speak to schools, speak at universities, to make sure that there is that understanding, that there is that awareness. And it can be done, but it is a cultural shift. And working in data centers is not an easy job. It is very high pressured, and it's really how do we support our younger engineers and our older engineers in the mental pressures that get put on us to deliver at speed. It's not just about educating them in a foundational and in a technical way. It's also making sure that they have the tools to be resilient and to keep going and to keep with that pressure. And maybe it will slow down, Philip. Maybe it will slow down. But right now we are in it, and it is difficult. It can be difficult for people. So I think it's important to touch on that mental side as well, and just have that balance.
Again, and back to power, which we can't avoid talking about when it comes to data centers. I mean, as we've said already, I think it's the main constraint, and you've mentioned a couple of things. But in terms of how it can be addressed, clearly maybe there's more resources. I think you said updating the grid, but as I understand it as well, it can take years and years for new power sources to get connected, and also I think the existing, or certainly up until recently, if you sort of bagged some power, you got yourself in the queue early, even if your project wasn't going to be built for 5 years. Whereas I think there's a bit of a mind change now, so that potentially the people that actually are going to deliver the project sooner get access. But please just tell me how you think the power landscape needs to be changed to make it better for the data center community.
So there's definitely a power struggle in the industry, as you know, and that's sort of metaphorically. It's like who's going to get there first, as well as physically. How do we physically get the power? And grid access is definitely become a sort of primary gateway factor for delivery. And so those who own the power, have the power in the race. So data centers, as we know, can be built faster than the transmission and upgrades can actually be delivered. So those connection delays and uncertainty is really sort of driving investment decisions. And it's creating a sort of stop-start nature in the industry. If people have power, they can proceed. If they can't, then they might not invest. Projects are going on hold. So I think, again, this is being quite a bit more transparent, and there needs to sort of be a strategic level conversation about how power is distributed, and looking at how we can use sustainable ways of delivering the power as well. People have sort of touched on geothermal, heat networks, offshore winds. There's been a lot of conversations around small modular reactors as well. I think they're a little way off, but certainly countries like Poland are looking at how they can drive the technology. And then obviously you have licensing issues. So there's a whole ball game there. So we do really need greater transparency so that we can be competitive. And I think that's probably going to be the key.
Okay, and one other angle, perhaps to ask about, and I think you referenced it near the start. I think you've published a new report that's calling for a sovereign data center framework, but you mentioned the geopolitics, and I think sovereignty seems to be becoming more important. So, but can you just give us a bit of an explanation as to why it's needed now, and what it would mean in practice for the UK?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And it's a really sort of interesting piece to write. And as AI becomes embedded across sort of public sectors, we do need to look at how we regulate this, and where our sensitive data is hosted, who controls that infrastructure, and how it's becoming powered is becoming strategically important. And we just feel as a business that if we had a sovereign data center framework, it could provide those sort of clearer long-term signals on how sensitive public sector and regulatory workloads should be hosted in the UK. And obviously, as you mentioned there again, sort of touched on the geopolitical side of things. You know, the world is quite a scary place at the moment. And as a country, and this goes for all countries, you need to be sure that, you know, the information that you're putting into these AI systems are being looked after and not being, you know, put anywhere that you shouldn't. So I think there is a key part around that. And it's not about necessarily limiting private investment, but sort of aligning capital, energy and policy so that the growth that we are seeing translates into resilient, secure and long-term economic benefits within the UK.
Okay, and maybe just then to finish, it'd be good to understand, because I say to some extent, I guess with if the data sovereignty becomes increasingly important, then you could argue then the UK can kind of look after itself. But at the moment, at least, it's very much an international market. You mentioned the Nordics have advantages. I think in America, there are far less regulations, so people can build quicker. So in bearing in mind that sort of current and maybe shifting landscape, what do you think the future holds for data center delivery in the UK? Are you I guess, a glass half empty or a glass half full person when it comes to, you know, the UK's opportunity?
Well, I'm always half full. That's just me though. But I think what's really interesting is that we are in the sort of fourth industrial revolution. I think it's a really exciting time, whether you're in the UK, whether you're in Europe, you know, and globally, other than that, obviously, the issues that I've talked about before. But if we're talking about data center growth, you know, we need to make sure that we've got that power, planning and capital and technology, and to make sure it's all aligned. If you look back in the last 20 years and the last 2 years, the growth within data centers, the data center sector has just grown exponentially. We're seeing sites from sort of 30 megawatts now up to 1 gigawatt is not uncommon. We need to focus on like a whole systems thinking and how we build not just the data center, but the infrastructure around it, which is going to be really key. And it's really an evolving ecosystem. For me, community engagement is going to be massive moving forward. And it's really important that we tell a story and that we bring the communities and the public along with us, and highlight what the actual benefits are of data centers. So yes, governments and corporates and investments and communities, I think we all need to work together so that we can deliver sustainable growth models in an ethical way. So I think there's a lot to go at.
That's fantastic. I mean, it's been great to chat, and thank you so much for sharing so many great insights into what's going on in the UK and slightly further afield as well. So, Marianne, really appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thanks, Philip.